largest airborne operation since the Second World War. So many paratroopers were slated to be deployed that they couldn't all be airlifted at once. The 6th had the dubious honor of being the first slated to drop. Initially delayed by inclement weather, the time had finally come. Apprehension and excitement ran through the ranks in equal measure. Battle awaited. It would be their first, and for many, their last. In Rostock, on the coast of the People's Republic of Germany, East German naval landing infantry were carefully loaded aboard waiting assault ships in the dark. Black waves sloshed against the flanks of the massive gray-hulled, crimson-decked vessels anchored in port. The bulk of these ships were East German in origin, though they were supplemented with additions from Poland and the Soviet Union. Each of these warships were intended solely for delivering their deadly cargo to enemy shores. The East German naval infantry had acquitted themselves well during the fighting in Denmark. Veterans from these combat landings along the Danish coast were scattered throughout the ranks of this freshly reformed regiment. Seasoned soldiers brought much-needed combat experience and confidence to the otherwise green troops. These naval infantry had been held in reserve, missing all of the hellacious combat that took place on the inner German border and beyond. But that made them no less deadly. As the soldiers marched up gangways onto the ships, their heavier gear was loaded by crane. BTR APCs were carefully loaded alongside amphibious PT-76 light tanks, as anxious anti-aircraft batteries watched the skies for NATO's vaunted air attack forces. The mine-choked sea inlet to Rostock was inky black in the night, like the waters of the Baltic themselves. It was late, and the men here should have been tired, but all they felt was a nervous excitement. They'd been preparing for this sort of mission for years, and now the time had finally come. As their ships finished loading and shoved off, every man aboard could only think of the uncertainty of the future and the coming storm of battle. In the slushy early-year snows of northern Finland, Soviet motor rifle divisions plowed great muddy ruts in the thawing earth as they assembled. The men who composed these formations were veterans of the Soviet armed forces. No strangers to deprivation and discomfort, they'd done their time in the active forces and had since been moved to the reserves. Now they were once again called upon to fulfill their duty to their motherland. They had been civilians until mere weeks ago. Some had received the benefit of brief refresher courses to attempt to reinstill military skill into them. Others were virtually fresh from their conscription offices, wearing previous generation military gear. Older vehicles had been assembled at motor pools across Russia and delivered by the extensive Soviet rail network. Aging tanks, APCs, and trucks were, like their reservist crews, past their prime, poorly maintained, and in many cases obsolete. Dredged from depots and warehouses and filled with crews, they made a spearhead of steel angled at Scandinavia. Now all that was left was waiting for the signal. Engines were kept warm, stockpiles of fuel and supplies established, weapons loaded and ranges calculated. The men of this fresh reserve army stood ready and willing to advance into combat, as they mentally prepared for what lay ahead. In ordinary conditions, in peacetime, such a large-scale maneuver of Soviet forces would have been impossible without drawing Western attention. However, this vast assembly of military forces had been undertaken in the intelligence blackout brought about in the wake of the Skysweeper attack on the West satellite network. They'd created a temporary darkness to cover their gathering of a militant host in the north. And now, it was time to strike. As NATO stemmed the communist tide in Germany, they were unaware of the Soviet Union's next move.